I still remember the sound of their laughter echoing across the country club dining room. 23 years old, carrying a silver tray, wearing a crisp white shirt with a black bow tie that felt like a noose around my neck. My stepfather's voice cut through the chatter. "Meet my stepson, everyone. He's just a waiter." The way he said it, like I was something stuck to the bottom of his Italian leather loafers. What they didn't know was that the quiet man in the corner booth, the one I'd been serving club sodas to for the past hour, had been listening to every word. What they couldn't have imagined was that this unassuming gentleman in his rumpled khakis would hold the power to change everything. And what none of them suspected was the secret I'd been carrying for months, one that would turn their perfect little world upside down. You see, I wasn't supposed to be there that night. I was supposed to be 3,000 miles away, starting my residency at Johns Hopkins. But life has a funny way of derailing your plans, especially when family loyalty gets in the way of your dreams. The Wilshire Country Club in Beverly Hills wasn't where Dr. Marcus Chen was meant to serve his first patients. Instead, here I was, Marcus the waiter, about to serve up the most satisfying dish of justice I'd ever prepared. That night changed everything. Not just for me, but for my entire family. Because sometimes the people who look down on you the most are the ones who have the furthest to fall. And sometimes, the person you least expect becomes your unlikely ally in the fight for respect. My mother, Elena, met Richard Pemberton III at a charity gala in Santa Monica when I was 15. She was working as a translator for the event, fluent in Mandarin, Spanish, and English, helping wealthy donors communicate with international guests. Richard was recently divorced, worth about $40 million from his family's real estate empire, and apparently fascinated by my mother's intelligence and grace. Within 18 months, they were married in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. Richard brought baggage. His daughter Madison, 2 years younger than me, who treated our Brentwood mansion like her personal kingdom, and his son Bradley, my age, who'd been kicked out of 3 prep schools for dealing Adderall. But the real challenge was Richard himself. A man who measured worth in stock portfolios and club memberships, who couldn't understand why I chose pre-med over business, who introduced me at parties as Elena's son, rather than his stepson. I remember the first family dinner where he laid out his expectations. "Marcus, you need to understand how things work in our circles. Image matters. Your little science experiments are fine for a hobby, but this family needs another generation in real estate." When I mentioned getting into UCLA's pre-med program, he actually laughed. "Medicine? That's a service industry, son. We're not service people." The humiliation started small. At the country club's 4th of July barbecue, Richard introduced me to his business partners as still figuring things out. When I corrected him, I was maintaining a 3.9 GPA in biochemistry, he waved dismissively. "College grades don't matter in the real world, Marcus. What matters is who you know." His friends chuckled politely while I stood there in my perfectly pressed polo, feeling like a fraud in designer clothes. The worst incident happened during my sophomore year at UCLA. I'd been invited to present my research on protein synthesis at a national conference. I was so proud, I practically floated home to share the news. Richard was hosting a dinner party for potential investors in his latest development project. When I walked into the dining room, glowing with excitement, he looked up from his seafood tower and said, "Perfect timing, Marcus. Can you help Maria in the kitchen? We're running behind." I stood there for a moment, conference invitation in my hand, watching 8 wealthy strangers look through me like I was part of the furniture. "Actually, Dad, I wanted to tell you, whatever it is, it can wait. This is business." That night, I served appetizers to men discussing million-dollar deals while my acceptance letter burned in my pocket. I watched Richard charm investors with stories about his success principles and family values, never once mentioning that his stepson was about to represent UCLA at a national academic conference. But here's the thing about Richard Pemberton III, he loved grand gestures. Every birthday, every achievement of Madison or Bradley's, he'd throw elaborate parties. When Bradley finally graduated high school after repeating senior year, Richard rented out half of Spago Beverly Hills. When Madison got accepted to USC's communications program, He bought her a brand new BMW and organized a celebration dinner for 50 people at the country club. When I graduated summa cum laude from UCLA and got accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical School, he offered to take the family to dinner at Olive Garden. To celebrate Marcus's accomplishment, he said, the word tasting sour in his mouth. That's when I decided to skip medical school. Not permanently, I deferred for a year. I told everyone it was to figure things out, but really, I had a plan. I was going to spend 1 year working at Richard's precious country club, saving every penny, watching him and his friends in their natural habitat. I was going to learn exactly how their world worked before I left it forever. What I didn't expect was to uncover the secret that would bring it all crashing down. Comment below and let me know where you're watching this from. I love hearing from viewers around the world, and I always try to respond to as many comments as I can. The Pemberton Annual Investment Gala was Richard's crown jewel, a black tie affair held every September at the Wilshire Country Club to celebrate another year of crushing the market, as he loved to say. This year marked the 10th anniversary of Pemberton Properties, and Richard had spared no expense. Ice sculptures, a string quartet, Wagyu beef stations, and an open bar stocked with bottles that cost more than most people's rent. I'd been working at the club for 8 months by then, long enough to know which members tipped well and which ones treated the staff like invisible furniture. Long enough to perfect the art of being professionally invisible while absorbing every conversation around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a future doctor serving cocktails to people who thought education was something you bought rather than earned. Richard had been particularly insufferable in the weeks leading up to the gala. He'd cornered me 3 days earlier in the kitchen, adjusting my bow tie like I was a child getting ready for picture day. Remember, Marcus, you represent this family tonight. Try not to embarrass us in front of my associates. Keep your head down, do your job, and maybe people won't ask too many questions about why my stepson is serving drinks instead of making something of himself. The guest list read like a who's who of Los Angeles real estate and finance. The Hendersons from Century City, the Kowalskis who owned half of Manhattan Beach, Judge Patricia Morrison who'd been approving Richard's development permits for years, and dozens of other wealthy families whose kids would never have to defer their dreams to prove a point to an arrogant stepfather. As guests began arriving, I stationed myself at the champagne station, watching Richard work the room in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He had that particular brand of charisma that wealthy men perfect, loud enough to command attention, charming enough to make people forget his cruelty, confident enough to make everyone else feel slightly inadequate. There's my boy. Richard's voice boomed across the room as Bradley walked in, fresh from his first semester at Pepperdine. Future CEO of Pemberton Properties, everyone. He pulled Bradley into a bear hug while photographers captured the moment for the society pages. Madison glided in behind them, stunning in a dress that probably cost more than my car, immediately surrounded by admirers. My mother arrived last, elegant as always in midnight blue silk, but I caught the tightness around her eyes. She'd been trying to convince Richard to acknowledge my academic achievements for years, but tonight she'd clearly given up the fight. She squeezed my hand briefly as she passed the champagne station, a small gesture of solidarity that meant everything. The evening's program included Richard's annual speech about building legacy and family values. As he took the podium, I found myself grinding my teeth at the hypocrisy. Here was a man talking about supporting the next generation while actively sabotaging his own stepson's dreams. 10 years ago, I founded Pemberton Properties with a simple vision, Richard began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Build something that matters. Create wealth that lasts. Raise children who understand the value of hard work and excellence. The crowd murmured approvingly while I tried not to choke on the irony. That's when I noticed the quiet man in the corner booth. He'd been nursing the same club soda for an hour, occasionally glancing up from his phone to observe the crowd. Mid-50s, gray hair, wearing an off-the-rack suit that looked out of place among the designer tuxedos. He seemed almost uncomfortable, like he was attending out of obligation rather than choice. As Richard's speech grew more grandiose, I watched the stranger's expression shift from polite attention to what looked like barely contained disgust. When Richard launched into a story about teaching young people the importance of earning their place in the world, The man actually winced. "Excuse me," the stranger called softly, raising his hand. Richard paused mid-sentence, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "I'm sorry, but did you say something about earning one's place?" The room fell silent. Richard's smile became strained. "Yes, absolutely. I believe in meritocracy. Excellence should be rewarded." The stranger nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me behind the champagne station. "Interesting philosophy," he said quietly, but his voice carried in the sudden silence. That's when Richard decided to make his point crystal clear. "Take my stepson, for example," he said, gesturing toward me with his champagne flute. "Marcus here is learning the value of honest work. Sometimes young people need to understand that dreams and reality are two different things. He thought he wanted to be a doctor, but here he is, learning real skills in the service industry." The laughter that followed was polite but cutting. I felt my cheeks burn as heads turned toward me, some pitying, others amused. Judge Morrison actually tittered behind her hand. "After all," Richard continued, warming to his theme, "not everyone can be a leader. Some people are meant to serve. Marcus is discovering where he truly belongs." That's when something inside me snapped. 8 months of humiliation, years of condescension, a lifetime of being treated like a charity case in my own family, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to helping this channel grow. The quiet stranger was watching me now, and I could see something in his eyes that looked like recognition. Not of my face, but of my situation. Like he'd been exactly where I was standing. I set down my serving tray and walked toward the podium. The walk across that marble floor felt like it took forever. Every step echoed in the sudden silence, every eye in the room tracking my movement toward the podium where Richard stood frozen, his champagne flute halfway to his lips. I could see confusion flickering across his face. This wasn't part of his carefully orchestrated evening. "Marcus," he said with forced joviality, "what are you?" "You're absolutely right, Richard," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "Some people are meant to serve. And some people—" I paused, pulling the folded letter from my jacket pocket, the letter I'd been carrying for 3 months, waiting for exactly this moment. "Some people are meant to save lives." The room held its breath. Richard's smile faltered. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, turning to address the crowd directly, "I'd like to share something with you about earning one's place in the world. 3 months ago, I received this letter." I unfolded it slowly, deliberately. "It's from Dr. Patricia Williams, Dean of Admissions at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine." Richard's face went white. He knew what was coming. "Dear Mr. Chen," I read aloud, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to receive the Osler Merit Scholarship, a full 4-year scholarship awarded to only 12 students nationwide based on exceptional academic achievement and research potential." The murmur that rippled through the crowd was different now, surprise mixed with growing understanding. I saw Judge Morrison lean forward, her expression shifting from amusement to curiosity. "The scholarship committee was particularly impressed by your undergraduate research on protein synthesis and its applications in cancer therapy, which has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Cellular Biology." I looked directly at Richard, whose champagne flute was trembling slightly in his hand. "We look forward to welcoming you to what many consider the most prestigious medical program in the country." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the string quartet's violins from the adjacent room, the soft clink of glasses from the bar, the barely audible whisper of the air conditioning. But in this room, nobody moved. "I deferred my acceptance," I continued, "because I thought family meant something. I thought proving myself here, in Richard's world, would somehow earn his respect. I thought if I worked hard enough, humble enough, long enough, he might finally see me as worthy." Richard found his voice. "Marcus, this isn't the time or place." "No," I said firmly. "This is exactly the time and place. You just told a room full of successful people that I'm learning where I truly belong in the service industry. You told them that dreams and reality are different things. You humiliated me in front of your friends to make some twisted point about knowing one's place. The crowd was shifting now, uncomfortable murmurs spreading like ripples. Madison looked mortified, Bradley was staring at his shoes, and my mother's eyes were bright with tears, though whether from pride or pain, I couldn't tell. But here's what you don't understand, Richard, I said, my voice growing stronger. I already know where I belong. I belong in operating rooms, saving lives. I belong in research labs, finding cures. I belong among people who measure worth by contribution, not bank accounts. That's when the quiet stranger in the corner stood up. Every head turned as he walked slowly toward the front of the room, his footsteps echoing mine from moments before. "Excuse me," he said softly, extending his hand to me. "James Morrison, Chief of Surgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center." The room erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison, his wife, looked stunned. Richard's mouth fell open. "I've been listening to your stepfather's speech about meritocracy and earning one's place, Dia," Morrison continued, his voice carrying easily in the silence. "And I have to say, it's fascinating to hear these words from a man whose company just lost its largest development contract due to what our investigation revealed as systematic bribery of city officials." The gasps were audible now. Richard's face went from white to gray. "You see," Morrison said, turning to address the crowd, "I wasn't invited to this party. I came here tonight in my capacity as chairman of the City Planning Commission's Ethics Review Board. We've been investigating Pemberton properties for 6 months. The FBI raid happens Monday morning." Richard's champagne flute shattered on the marble floor. "But listening to you humiliate this young man, a future doctor, a scholar, someone who embodies everything you claim to value, has been enlightening." Morrison turned back to me. "Mr. Chin, I understand you've deferred your medical school acceptance." I nodded, still stunned by the turn of events. "Well, I happen to know Dr. Williams quite well. I think we can arrange for you to start in January rather than waiting another full year. Cedars-Sinai also has an excellent pre-residency research program, if you're interested." The room was in chaos now. Guests were pulling out phones, some heading for the exits, others clustering in small groups whispering urgently. Judge Morrison was staring at her husband with a mixture of shock and what looked like profound relief. I looked at Richard one last time. He was standing behind the podium like a man watching his empire crumble in real time, which I suppose he was. "Thank you for the lesson about knowing one's place," I said quietly. "I finally understand mine." I untied my bow tie, set it on the podium next to his shattered champagne glass, and walked out of the Wilshire Country Club for the last time. The parking lot erupted into chaos as I stepped outside. Guests were streaming out of the club, some frantically making phone calls, others huddling in tight groups exchanging whispered theories about what they'd just witnessed. The valet stand was swamped with people demanding their cars immediately, as if staying another minute might somehow implicate them in Richard's crimes. Morrison followed me out, his wife Patricia close behind. She looked shaken but oddly relieved, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "James," she said quietly, "how long have you known about Pemberton?" 6 months, he replied, not taking his eyes off me. "Ever since the Riverside project. When developers start getting permits approved in record time, we notice. When those same permits skip environmental reviews and safety inspections, we investigate." He turned to his wife. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Patricia, but your signature is on half those approvals." Judge Morrison sank onto a nearby bench, her elegant composure finally cracking. "He told me they were routine commercial permits. He said his lawyers had handled all the environmental studies." She looked up at her husband with tears in her eyes. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that she'll need to recuse herself from any future city planning cases and possibly face an ethics review, Dr. Morrison said gently. "But not bad enough to destroy her career if she cooperates with the investigation." As if summoned by his words, my mother appeared in the parking lot, having somehow managed to slip out during the chaos. She walked straight to me, pulled me into a fierce hug and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. "I should have done that years ago." Mom, you didn't know. I knew enough, she said firmly. I knew he was cruel to you. I knew he diminished your accomplishments. I told myself he'd change, that love would soften him, but... She shook her head. I chose him over you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Morrison cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Pemberton, I don't mean to intrude, but you might want to consider your legal position. If your husband has been using family assets to finance his bribery scheme. My mother's face went pale. The house, the cars, my jewelry, it's all in his name. He insisted when we got married. Said it was for tax purposes. She laughed bitterly. I guess I know the real reason now. Over the next few days, the story exploded across Los Angeles media. Beverly Hills real estate mogul arrested in multi-million-dollar bribery scheme. Country club corruption, how Pemberton Properties bought City Hall. FBI raids reveal decade of illegal development deals. What the media didn't capture was the human wreckage left behind. Madison, who'd never known her father was anything less than honorable, had a complete breakdown and was hospitalized for exhaustion. Bradley, surprisingly, seemed almost relieved. Later he'd tell me he'd suspected something was wrong for years but never had the courage to ask questions. My mother filed for divorce within a week, discovering that their prenuptial agreement protected none of her interests but all of his debts. She moved back into the small Santa Monica apartment she'd kept as an office, returning to translation work to pay for a lawyer who might help her untangle her finances from Richard's criminal enterprise. The unexpected twist came 3 weeks later, when Dr. Morrison called me personally. Marcus, I need to tell you something about that night at the club. I didn't just happen to be there investigating your stepfather. My heart sank. Had this all been some elaborate setup? I've been following your research, he continued. Sarah Kim at UCLA sent me your protein synthesis paper 6 months ago. She thought you might be interested in our cancer research program at Cedars-Sinai. I was at the club that night specifically to meet you. I sat down hard on my mother's couch. You were there for me? I was there to offer you a position in our lab while you complete medical school. What I witnessed instead was a young man of extraordinary character standing up to a bully who happened to be a criminal. He paused. The offer still stands, by the way. In fact, after seeing how you handled yourself under pressure, I'm even more convinced you belong in medicine. The research position at Cedars-Sinai changed everything. Not just because it meant working with cutting-edge cancer treatments, but because it connected me with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a brilliant oncologist who would become my mentor, my closest friend, and eventually, much more than either. She was the one who helped me understand that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates, it's about the people who see your worth and choose to invest in your success. Richard's trial dominated the news for months. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for bribery, tax evasion, and money laundering. His real estate empire collapsed, leaving dozens of investors ruined and hundreds of employees jobless. The Pemberton name became synonymous with corruption in Los Angeles development circles. Judge Morrison cooperated fully with investigators and received a formal reprimand but kept her position on the bench. She and Dr. Morrison became unlikely allies to my mother during the divorce proceedings, helping her recover some of her financial losses and providing character references for her translation business. I started medical school at Johns Hopkins in January, as Dr. Morrison had promised. The transition from serving drinks to studying medicine felt surreal at first, but every cadaver lab, every pharmacology exam, every rotation reminded me why I'd endured those months of humiliation. I wasn't just becoming a doctor, I was reclaiming my identity. During my second year, I received an unexpected visitor. Bradley had driven cross-country from his new life in Portland, where he was working as a carpenter and attending community college to study sustainable construction. He looked healthier than I'd ever seen him, clear-eyed, purposeful, free from the pressure of living up to Richard's impossible standards. I wanted to thank you, he said over coffee near campus. That night at the club, when you stood up to him, it was the first time anyone ever called out his bullshit. It gave me permission to stop trying to be someone I wasn't. We talked for hours about growing up in Richard's shadow, about the relief of discovering who we really were when freed from his expectations. Bradley had found peace in working with his hands, creating things instead of manipulating people. I'd found mine in the precise choreography of surgery, in the moment when knowledge and skill combined to heal. The grand gesture that Richard had planned for that night, the announcement of a new $100 million development project, became evidence in his criminal trial. The architectural models, the promotional videos, the investor presentations, all of it revealed the scope of his corruption and the arrogance that ultimately brought him down. As for my relationship with Elena Vasquez, it grew slowly from professional respect to deep friendship to something neither of us had expected. She understood the weight of expectations that come with medical training, the pressure to prove yourself worthy of the trust patients place in you. She also understood what it meant to build a career despite people who couldn't see your potential. 5 years later, I'm Dr. Marcus Chen, chief resident in oncological surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Tomorrow, I'll perform my first solo pancreatic cancer surgery, one of the most complex procedures in medicine, on a 67-year-old grandmother who reminds me of my mother's quiet strength. Elena will be watching from the gallery, not as my supervisor anymore, but as my partner in every sense of the word. We're getting married next month in my mother's small Santa Monica garden, surrounded by the family we've chosen rather than the one we inherited. My mother rebuilt her life with the same grace she brought to everything else. Her translation business thrived as she found her voice again, and she recently started dating Dr. Morrison's brother, a kind literature professor who appreciates both her intelligence and her resilience. She never speaks of Richard with bitterness, only with the quiet satisfaction of someone who escaped a prison they hadn't realized they were in. Bradley completed his associate degree and now runs a sustainable construction company in Oregon, specializing in affordable housing projects. He visits every Christmas, bringing stories of building homes rather than tearing down lives. Madison struggled longer with our father's betrayal, but she's found her footing as a social worker in Phoenix, helping kids from broken homes. She says understanding manipulation helped her recognize it in others and fight against it. Looking back on that night at the country club, I realized that humiliation became the catalyst for the most authentic version of myself. Richard's cruelty forced me to choose between his approval and my own integrity, and I finally chose correctly. Sometimes the people who hurt us most give us the greatest gifts by showing us exactly who we don't want to become. The quiet man in the corner booth, Dr. Morrison, taught me that rescue can come from the most unexpected places, but only if you're brave enough to speak your truth when it matters most. He showed me that real power lies not in crushing others, but in lifting them up when they're ready to rise. I learned that family isn't about shared DNA or last names. It's about the people who see your potential when you can't see it yourself, who challenge you to become better rather than demanding you become smaller. Elena, Dr. Morrison, even Bradley and Madison in their own ways, they became my real family by choosing to believe in me when belief mattered most. And Richard? He was released from federal prison last year. I heard he's working as a night security guard in Riverside, living in a studio apartment paid for by his sister's charity. I don't wish him suffering, but I don't waste energy on forgiveness either. His opinion of me stopped matching the moment I realized that his cruelty said everything about him and nothing about my worth. If you're watching this and you're in your own version of that country club dining room, whether it's a toxic job, a dysfunctional family, or any situation where people diminish your dreams to elevate themselves, remember this. Their limitations are not your limitations. Their fears are not your reality. And their inability to see your potential has absolutely nothing to do with whether that potential exists. Your worth isn't determined by the people who can't recognize it. Your dreams aren't invalidated by those too small to share them. And sometimes, walking away from their approval is the first step toward finding your own voice. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter, that their worth isn't up for debate, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Leave a comment telling me about a time you chose your own path despite the doubters. I read every single one, and your courage inspires more people than you know. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go write your own ending.